You see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me do slideshow from beginning then. Okay, so we should be good to go then. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time to be here today. I am going to talk to you all about how to manage that behavior. So our children have experienced oftentimes a trauma, and we need to be aware of how that early experience may now be impacting their everyday behavior. And so we're going to start with this idea that all behavior makes sense. So all behavior is communication. And if we can see it as communication, the child's behavior can be telling us that they need our help. So the first bullet here says, I need your help so I can get back in bounds. And sometimes that's what's happening is the child's behavior is out of control. And it's really this cry for help me. I don't know how to get my body back under control. Or it may be that the child's behavior is an attempt to get a need met. And sometimes that's as simple as I need to feel safe. And so they may be expressing a feeling that they're having, and that they just need to express that. Or the behavior, the feelings may be being expressed, and we want to recognize that all those behaviors are valid. No behavior is bad behavior. We want them to identify what that feeling is and then learn to express it in an acceptable way to you and to others. But no behaviors are bad behaviors. We just need to know how to express them in that acceptable way where no one gets hurt, either their feelings or physically. Let's see if I can switch to my next slide. So this is a slide that comes from Julie Kurtz's presentation from the Center for Optimal Brain Integration. And I love this graphic. I provided you the link in our resources, so you'll be able to reference this. This image of the goldfish with the shark behavior. It's so representative of a child with what we might call shark behavior, where the behavior looks really ugly sometimes, aggressive, but that remembering that underneath that behavior is that little goldfish, is that child. And so when we see a child with shark behavior, we want to get curious. Is the child trying to get, avoid, or express something? Or are they just feeling unsafe? So this is what we call the function of the behavior. So once we know the function or the why of the behavior, we can decide how we want to respond. So our response is going to be very different based on the need of the child. So once we know the function of the behavior, instead of reacting to that shark behavior, we can really respond empathetically to that child based on their need. So the image also reminds me of the iceberg. So behavior is often described as an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg is the behavior that we see. But underneath that, that behavior that we're seeing is even more. And that bigger portion, we need to really look below the surface and say, what is underneath this, driving this behavior? Is it the emotional state of the child? Is it the physical state? Is it the family situation? Is it these stressors that are in the child's life? What is it that's causing this behavior now? And so once we get curious and we understand what's causing the behavior, we can respond to it rather than just reacting to the behavior. So our children have experienced trauma, and we need to know the signs of trauma-related stress so that we can recognize it and react to it appropriately. So when children in a heightened stress state that's produced by trauma, they often seem to be sad a lot of the time, or they don't demonstrate any emotion at all. Or they develop a hair trigger response that, very easily disrupted, like a car alarm that goes off just when a leaf, hits it. Um, or we see neutral facial expressions. The child may see these neutral facial expressions that we have. We call them micro expressions. Even friendly expressions, they may see as a threat. Because they're very good at reading all these microaggressions. And so children can, what we think, misinterpret a facial expression. Um, they have problems regulating their strong negative emotions. So, not just anger, but also fear and sadness and loneliness and shame. And they demonstrate a significant increase in impulsivity and distractibility. They're also prone to withdrawal or aggression, so it's both ends of the spectrum. And they don't seem to feel empathy or have a sense of right and wrong. So this is a list that comes from Dr. Schenker's Impact of Trauma information sheet. And so the first and most important step for dealing with these behaviors is to recognize that they don't mean that the child lacks self-control or is trying to be disobedient. These problems are not the result of a choice. This is that the child can't do it. It's not that they won't do it. But because the child is burning so much energy dealing with the effects of the trauma, that stress response that they're having, there isn't enough energy for them to actually regulate their thoughts, regulate their behavior, their emotion. Um, and so Mona Delahook, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but Mona Delahook is the author of Beyond Behaviors, and she calls this our body budget. So you need to see these behaviors as signs that the stress level on the child is too high. It's to be reduced. So how do we reduce the stress? It's hard not to react to that shark behavior. As they say in Circle Security, we hear shark music playing. And again, there's a resource for you, a video from Circle of Security that will explain that more deeply. The real key is staying calm when we begin to hear that shark music. Staying calm ourselves. If we can stay calm, our children can borrow from our calm and co-regulate with us in that calm state. So we need to do things like take deep breaths, right? Ourselves. So in the face of a child who's melting down, if we can be next to them and take some deep breaths and calm ourselves, the child has that calmness to regulate with, rather than when we join them in that upset, that they don't have anything to co-regulate with other than more upset. So taking those deep breaths, you're modeling for the child. If we can't do that, how can we expect the child to do that? And so, say, this is really hard. I'm going to take a few breaths right now and take time to calm down, right? And try to calm down. And we do that. Sit there right next to them and take those deep breaths. One of the other ways of reducing stress is staying close. When the child is ready to connect, then you're available. And you can even say, I'm here when you're ready. All children have different sensory systems, and so you can kind of play with some of these things. What helps that child to be calm? Is it being close? Is it being a little bit away from them? Is it talking in a whisper voice? Is it using a sing-songy tone? What are the things that reduce that child's stress and helps to calm them? Um, And then we really need to be a stress detective. And so we have to figure out what is underneath that behavior. And so, can you name the feeling behind the behavior? So, Dan Siegel says, name it to right? So the word of the feeling is in the upstairs part of our brain, and the emotion is in the downstairs part of our brain. And so when we name it, it sends soothing chemicals down to the lower part of the brain and calms that lower brain. And so asking children, how are you feeling, right? How do you feel right now when everything's going well, so that they can begin that process of learning to identify their feelings. And so this helps them to practice the process so that when they are upset, they are already familiar with trying to identify what am I feeling right now. So we integrate the brain by reflecting the emotion feeling and telling them the story of how they got upset and how you're supporting them to calm themselves down. So they have this coherent story that makes sense. And we walk them up to their upstairs brain when we can name the emotion. And we also feel better just when someone understands. So it's a powerful thing for us just to listen to kids and for them to feel heard. And so we give them our full attention and we attune them. Special time is another really great way to do that, where you take time to attune with them. And, this is not, it won't moment, but this is something that over time, if we take time, 10 to 15 minutes with a child one-on-one, giving them attention and filling their emotional tank, they have the ability to sustain themselves longer and even to ask us for that special time to be able to refill their tank and feel like they can move forward. So the quote here by Dr. Schenker is, in self-reg, we pause to ask, why am I seeing this behavior? And why now? Before we react. So Dr. Schenker wrote such thing as a bad kid. So treat a child as he says, if you treat a child as if they're bad, before you know it, he'll start to see himself that way. And so he talks about the need to recognize the difference between misbehavior and stress behavior. So what I've been describing to you is that stress behavior and how, us seeing it as that stress behavior rather than seeing it as misbehavior. So like all children, they need to feel safe and secure with us. So, but that's not going to happen until we realize that there's no such thing as a bad kid. We can't do this if we can do this if we can see all their behavior as communication. So, getting curious, what are they trying to tell me? And then chasing the why, right? That's how Dan Siegel calls it. We need to be stress detectives and figure out what's triggering this child. How we react is the most important thing. We need to partner with the child to help them to solve their problem. And so the quote here is, it's not your job to stop a child from having a tantrum. It's your job not to have one. So we don't want to join their, we want to have them join our calm. And so saying things like, let's clean up the block so that we can go outside. So you're partnering with them to get them to join you in that rather than, you need to clean up the blocks or we're not going outside. That threat will be a stress to the child. And so we can use that language of let's clean it up, and we can partner with them and assist them in that process. Our children are not perfect, and neither are we. So we're all going to make mistakes at some time. We're all going to lose our temper at some time, right? So when either of us do lose it, we need to get the support that we need to get back under control. And so if it's the child, we may need to support them, right? They may need our support. If it's us, we need to get what we need to weather the storm. So taking those deep breaths, saying a mantra to yourself, like, this too shall pass, right? But whatever your mantra is that really helps you to get through that moment and to move on, or to say to yourself that, what is it that you love about that child, and to focus on that instead of the issue that you're faced with in the moment. We need to be able to, get some of our energy out. Can we take the kids outside? Do we need to go for a run? Do we need to, run up and down the stairs, if nothing else, right? To get some of that energy out. We might need to ask our partner to step in. Do whatever you need to regain your calm. And that you can always apologize for behavior that when you say or do something that you wish that you hadn't. Apologies, the wonderful thing about relationships is we can always repair, and so we can always apologize and move forward from there. So I've been talking about that the key really is to stay calm and non-reactive as consistently as possible. I know that this is easier said than done, but we're the ones who help our children handle their strong emotions. And so if we can't stay calm, how can we expect them to? So Jerry Paul says, don't just do something, stand there. So I had trouble saying that because the opposite is what we normally say. We usually say, don't just stand there, do something. But we want to stop and stand there and not do something, not just react, so that we can really intentionally stay calm and use some of those practices that we're talking about to reflect on the way that we normally would respond, right? What's my instinctive response? Usually it's how we were raised as a child, that we'll hear our parents' words coming out of our mouth when we get into that stress state, right? But if we can stay calm, what we can do is to be able to, take a step back, right? Stand there, even step backwards if that helps you to get some distance on the situation. Count to 10, pour yourself a cup of tea, do whatever you need to do to be able to get to that calmer place and avoid flipping our lid. So relationship researcher John Gottman, he says that it takes 5 positive feelings or interactions to every negative feeling or interaction to have a healthy relationship. And this is true of all of our relationships, our relationship with our partners as well as our relationship with our children. And so we need to catch them being good. We need to catch them doing things that we want them to do more often, and give them what we call PDA, positive descriptive acknowledgement. And so this PDA comes from the teaching pyramid. California teaching pyramid is being taught throughout California and was taught previously throughout the nation. And PDA is what they call close to magic. Because makes such a big difference in our interactions with children. And so if you think about it as what we focus on will grow. So if we focus on misbehavior or the struggles that the child's having, those behaviors are going to increase. But if we focus on the positive behaviors and the child's successes, even little tiny baby steps that they're making, right? Those small progress that we see, these behaviors are what's going to increase. So the real key here is that we're being descriptive about that behavior. So yes, it's positive, and yes, it's acknowledging what the child did, but it describes exactly what the child did so they can do it again. And so that's some of the magic in it. And so I've seen this turn around children's behavior very quickly because they start to notice that's what gets attention. That's what gets us our comments and our attention from them, for them, is when we notice them doing these things. And so we say, you know, hey, I saw you gave your brother to when he, you know, when he was crying. That was really kind of you. Well, that the child notes that and says, I can do that again. Right. And so these little things that they do, hey, I saw you put your dishes in the sink. Thank you for doing that. Right. Those little acknowledgments that are that positive, but we describe exactly what they did so they can do it again. It's not just a good job. You know, I saw you've been doing a great job lately, right? That's not specific enough. It needs to be descriptive. So add in PDAs. That's a huge a help for our relationships with our children. So those positive comments, those positive feelings and interactions are key. The other technique that Teaching Pyramid teaches is problem solving. So they have steps to follow to help children with conflict with others and to solve problems. And so I've kind of summarized them here. You can see the visual at the bottom is one that they have. There are several out there, so you can find what problem solving steps are most helpful for you or make your own. And so the first step is that something happens and we want the child to stop and think. And I know this takes a lot of frontal lobe control from the child. So that frontal lobe starts developing at 2 and continues developing now into our, you know, mid-late 20s. So we know that this is a very immature brain when we're talking about a child. And so that ability to stop and think, they need to practice that. And so, number one, something happens. Stop and think, what's the problem? And then, how do I feel? So, you know, we want to say what's that feeling that I'm having? And so again, name it to tame it, right? Getting them to identify how they're feeling. And then getting them to, if they're upset, to do something to calm down. Take 3 deep breaths, right? To calm down. There's a Tucker Turtle story where he goes inside of his shell, takes 3 deep breaths, and then comes out and decides and thinks of a solution, right? So number 4, then let's figure out what could we do about this problem? What are some solutions? And let the child just brainstorm all the different solutions. And then, well, let's pick one. Which one? And the key is to let them try it, even if you know it's not going to work, because they need to be able to learn the process of problem solving. And every solution we come up with does not work. Even using our words does not work every single time, right? So they have to be able to try it and say, oh, that didn't work. What else can you do? Right? What else am I going to try? And that persistence of trying a solution and trying another solution and another solution until I get to the one that works. And so, you know, one of the steps that you can add in here between the before the after think of a solution and before try it is, would it be safe? Would it be fair? How would everybody feel? So an older child is able to actually evaluate the solution they came up with before they try it. Let's think, would it be safe? Would it be fair? How's everybody gonna feel? Okay, it's good. All right, let's try it. Right. And so that process that they can go through in order to solve their problem needs to be practiced over and over and over again, so that they learn that process. But that problem solving that you're teaching them is a lifelong skill. And so practice with little problems so that when big problems come up, they know the process. So this is a list from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and it lists elements of trauma-informed parenting. So I hope as I read this list that you'll recognize some of these elements from the presentation that I've just been giving, and I hope that you'll note any that you would like to learn more about. So recognize the impact that trauma has had on your child. Help your child to feel safe. Help your child to understand and manage those overwhelming emotions. Respect and support positive, stable, nurturing relationships in the life of your child. There are so many different relationships that our children have, and it doesn't have to be us. They just need one important person who really just loves and adores them and who is their person. And so who is that person? Helping them to have relationships with people at school, with people in your faith organization, people in your neighborhood, wherever they are, people in their family that are their support people. Help your child develop a strength-based understanding of his, her, or their life story. So understanding, being able to tell a coherent story about our life is one of the most therapeutic things that we can do. And so it's so in a strength-based way. How did that child survive and get through, and what strengths did they have in the process of living their life and being so successful? Be an advocate for your child. Our children need us. So we're the only advocates, right? We need to be advocating for them, and take care of yourself. So this brings me to my next slide, which is that I want you to discover the massive benefits of self-care. Um, so engage in self-care routine. It's actually been proven, clinically proven, to reduce or eliminate anxiety and to reduce stress, to improve concentration, to minimize frustration and anger, to increase happiness, to improve energy, and more, right? So it has all these really positive benefits. And so we have to take care of ourselves to do the important work that you're doing. And so you cannot care for your child without first caring for yourself. And so that's why I put the oxygen mask analogy on here. I'm sure you guys have all heard that, that we have to put our oxygen mask on first, or we're no help to our child. And so take care of yourself so that you can take care of your child. So the other thing I mentioned earlier is give yourself grace. You have permission to make mistakes. Remember, the focus is not on how far you've come, not on how far, the focus is on how far you've come, not how far you have to go, right? So focus on those baby steps. Where is that progress that we are making? And let's revel in that rather than focusing way out there on how much further we have to go. We're really looking for that progress, not perfection. So recognizing those little improvements is going to help us to focus on that progress. So just show up and be the loving, compassionate parent that your child needs. So it's not really a matter of if we're going to make a mistake, it's when we make a mistake. And so we all do make those mistakes, and we just need to be a good enough parent. So when you make a mistake, we can apologize, like I mentioned earlier, and you can ask for a redo. I love redos because you can you're allowed to redo and the child's allowed to redo. And so the idea that good enough parenting is actually we just have to be emotionally attuned 30% of the time, which really isn't, that great if we think about it. But we don't have to be perfect, but we may need a redo in order to be attuned to our child and responding sensitively to them when they really need us. So allow your child to do that redo. That was a mistake, and that's not what we do. So let's go on and on pause now, and let me know when you're ready for a redo, right? And so you give them that permission to pause and to decide what they want to do. Um, or if you're the one who's made the mistake, you yell at your child or whatever it is, raising your voice, you can repair the moment by apologizing. I recognize that I was yelling and I shouldn't have reacted that way, right? I would don't ever promise that you're never going to do it again because we will. And so we're only human and we're not perfect. So you can say, I wish I had calmly said, and then you say the words, right? So you just give yourself a redo. And so I hope that you will take this self-care and grace seriously. And, parenting is one of the hardest things we will ever do. And so, you are such a blessing in the child's life, and I want you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. So I have this last slide to kind of give you guys a little review of, and I just was trying to think of what are the key pieces that I've been trying to communicate to you guys today. And so grow is the word that I want you to remember. And so it's a good way to remember the key points that I've presented. So the G is for get connected. So Dan Siegel would say that we need to connect before we redirect. We often want to redirect children's behavior, have them do something different than what they're doing. And that's great to teach them what to do instead of what not to do. But we first have to get connected because the child has no reason to listen to us if we're not in connection with them, right? And so our relationship with the child is that most critical piece of our success with that child. And so when they feel like they belong and they're connected, they have a reason to cooperate and to engage with others in a positive way. And so get connected first. The R is for reflect. So that's chasing the why. So I've talked to you about this takes time to step back, to take a deep breath, to ask ourselves, why is my child behaving the way that they are? Right? Um, and so that figuring out, it's not easy, I know, but figuring out the why is really important so that we know how we want to respond. What's the need so that we can respond to that? If we meet the need, the behavior goes away because all behavior is communication. The O is for observe. So be a trauma detective or a stress detective and observe and notice if your child is being triggered or what is the antecedent and the consequence. In my early days in early childhood, we would say ABC, antecedent, behavior, consequence, right? And that there's a behavior, but there's something that happens before and something that happens after. And are we looking for what's happening before and what's happening after? And are those things possibly impacting that behavior? Could they be somehow the why behind that behavior? That they know that when this child does this, this is how my child's going to react. Or when do they know that if I do this, I know I'm going to get this response from this adult or from this other child or whatever. So is there something coming something after that behavior. And when we remove that, the behavior goes away as well. And so really looking at, being that detective, it's sometimes not obvious, and we need to watch and be curious to figure out what's really happening. And last is the W. This stands for water what you want to see grow. So this is the PDA that I was talking about. It really is close to magic. And so comment on and focus on what's going well. So thank you. These are the resources that I was telling about. And Julie Kurtz's website, Optimal Brain Integration. She has some resources there, including a scripted story for emotional literacy and self-regulation, which really it's a book to read to them for them to be able to understand how they can regulate their body and their stress response. Circle of Security has those videos I was talking about, not only ones about the circle, learn about, but also that shark music that we may be hearing. And then misbehavior versus stress behavior is Dr. Schenker. And so his website is selfreg.ca. And then the last two links that I have here are the teaching pyramid. And so there's both the California cainclusion.org. And that one has a lot of resources, including the steps to problem solving and conflict resolution. They also have helpful resources like a thermometer for how am I feeling, right? Am I in the feeling red hot, or am I feeling blue calm, and anywhere in between, as well as emotion faces for children to begin to be able to name their emotions, to identify what emotion am I feeling. And then the last link here is for the challenging behavior national website for the teaching pyramid. And so again, additional resources for you. So Jen, are there any questions? Or should I go into some ones that came up earlier?
Yes, if you could share some of the questions that have come up earlier,
Okay.
that would be great. And then if anyone has any questions or even a scenario about a tricky behavior, you can type that into the chat as well.
Yeah, so one of them that we do get questions about a lot, and so I put together a brief slide on this, but the behavior is about encopresis, that wetting and soiling. And so encopresis is actually the um, the the term that we use when a child is having bowel movements and maybe not even under their control. And so that encopresis really is a symptom of a complex relationship between the psychological and the environment. And so it really is this situational thing that will happen with children. And so what causes encopresis? So children who have been sexually abused ignore that part of their body and may stop receiving cues from their body that they have to use the bathroom. And so that encopresis is a system of that complex relationship that's going on, right, with their body and what's happening, in their lives. And so fear is the most common cause of encopresis. Um, so pushing out a bowel movement can be the biggest fear that that child has, right? And that they have to face that every single day. So it can be really a lot of pressure for that child to be having to manage that. And that they want to just ignore it. They want to pretend that it's not happening. And so what we have found is that the best thing that we can do is to teach a child about how their bowels work so that they can strengthen muscles and nerves that control the bowel function. And so, when a child is really avoiding using the toilet and withholding their stools, the intestinal wall and the nerves within they stretch, and that nerve sensation diminishes. And so the child actually isn't having the same sensation as this goes on with time. And so they can be chronically constipated. And then, eventually the sphincter muscles actually, the valves stop working well, and it's hard to keep the stool inside of the rectum. And so, they can no longer hold back that stool. It can also leak around a blockage. And so children will be having this out of their control. And so teaching them about their body and about ways to strengthen those muscles and nerves that control their bowels, that gives them the ability to take control of that again. The other thing that I've seen is fecal smearing. Children will actually take their feces and smear it, and that it sometimes can be sensory. And so giving them sensory activities to do, playing with Play-Doh and oobleck and all those fun things so that they get that sensory input. It's also can be the odor that they're seeking. And so unfortunately, when that odor is constant, it can actually become comforting for the child. And so they may want they smear so that they can smell that smell. And so, we want to be sensitive to what this child's experiences may have been. And, really teach them how their bowels work, how their body works, so that they can take control of their body. And so there is an article here from healthychildren.org, which can be helpful if you're looking for more information. The other question that we get a lot is when a child doesn't want to sleep. So a lot of our kiddos have a hard time at night. And so if we think about the things that I talked about earlier, first we want to chase the why. We have to be a stress detective. And so we want to say, what is behavior coming from? And so some of our children find nighttime to be very stressful because that's when their abuse occurred. And so they have a hard time relaxing at night and not anticipating something bad happening. Or it, maybe that the children are have a hard time relaxing in general, winding down at the end of the day, and being able to relax enough to get into that sleep mode. And so, really thinking about why might this child be having a difficult time with that sleep. And then thinking of ways to smooth that transition. I talked about the frontal lobe and how immature it is. When it's not well developed, it's difficult for children to transition from one thing to another. And so building in some smooth transitions for children so that they don't have to abruptly like, okay, now it's time to go to bed, but let's move into that part of our day and really having some routines. The routines feel really safe and secure and predictable, right? So having some of those routines of reading books, and taking a bath and being able to sit in the rocking chair and have a warm cup of milk, and what are the routines for the end of the day that really are that smooth transition into relaxing and getting your body ready to sleep. And so the other thing that I think is really helpful is reading books about sleep. So books are a real great avenue for children to think about somebody other than themselves. So I'm reading about the child in the book. We're not talking about me, we're talking about the child in the book. And we're able to read about this child and talk about the child and the hard time that they're having. And that can be really helpful for them to process what's happening with them. Um, and so reading books about sleep can really be helpful for children to begin to think about that a little bit more. The other thing to realize is that our children process through play. And so allowing time for play. If you know that your child is having difficulty sleeping, have some baby dolls in a doll bed that they can play sleeping. You know, if they're having a hard time eating, can you have, you know, food for them to pretend that they're, you know, feeding their dolls and, you know, pretending to eat and pretending to, you know, cook, those kinds of things that children will play out their stresses. And we don't have to understand what they're playing out. We just need to allow for that space because that's how they get mastery over it. And so that special time that I was talking about, giving your child to play and they decide what they're going to play. We could provide some things that we think might be useful for their play, but we don't guide the play. We don't say, and now we're going to put the baby dolls to bed. We just let them play. And then as they play, we just witness what they have to, you know, what is in their play. And that play can be really healing for children. So those are some of the ideas that I have around sleep. And then the other one that comes up quite often is food issues. And so being a stress detective, right, we're going to chase the why, and that these issues related to food are not uncommon in adopted and foster children for a variety of reasons. But if we chase the why, a lot of our children have experienced food insecurity. And so they may not have they may not have known, you know, when or where their next meal was coming from. And so experiencing that can still be impacting them years later. So they may have experienced food being used to express love. So when they got food, it was because it was supposed to be a substitute for love, or an apology. And that too can put some emotion around food. And so we really want to kind of be curious about why, and not be assuming that it's that the child won't eat, but that they can't, that they're having a difficult time. So can we name the emotion? And I would say probably anxiety, right? Feeling anxious is probably the emotion that's there around the food. We could probably say the same thing about the sleep, right? That fear, that anxiety, right? That's what's underneath that behavior. And so food scarcity contributes to anxiety around food and makes them more likely to rely on those familiar foods. What are those? You know, they'll want to eat those things that are familiar and comforting, because they are feeling anxious. So this can really lead to some picky eating, right? So we get our picky eaters. They may only want prepackaged foods that are familiar to them. And so what can we do? Now we problem solve, right? Now we move into our what are the solutions? And so we want to allow them control. So allowing them to choose what they put on their plate. And so, you know, this means serving family style or buffet style, right? So that they can actually choose what goes onto their plate. So we don't want eating to turn into a power struggle. And so if we can allow young people a choice, respecting their autonomy, they're likely to branch out more quickly than if we make it a battle. So try to offer something new at each meal. And so this opportunity to try new foods, not forced, but to try them. And they say that a child has to actually see something on their plate 15 times before they're willing to try it, even to taste it, right? So we want to have food, those healthy foods that we want them to move to, just have them available. Um, if your child is able to read, posting a menu so they can see that there's something on the menu that they're going to want to have, right? And so we may need to have that bread or those mashed potatoes or whatever it is, that's one food that we know that they're going to eat, that we're going to have on the menu so that they know that there will be food for them. Because the other issue that often comes is food hoarding. And so children really who come from scarcity, being afraid that there's not going to be food available. And so they'll actually hide the food under their bed, in their closet, wherever they can, so that they know that it's there. And so having a drawer in the refrigerator that is theirs, that there are snacks in that they can get at any time, so they know that there is a place where they can put food and that that's their food and that they can eat it, and that they don't have to, it's under their control. They can have it when they want it. And so we may put healthier things in there for them to snack on, but it's always going to be available. And so those are some of the things that you can try, so that children get that sense of, can overcome that scarcity, that feeling of scarcity, and that they are going to be able to have food and that they have control over what food they're going to have. And so I hope I've answered enough on that. So are there any other questions that are popping up there?
I don't think so, Lynn. I think we do have,
If we have a few more minutes, there was one more that was mentioned previously.
okay, great.
So when children are refusing to get out of their car seat, they may be being resistant and not want. Here, I can go ahead and stop sharing, maybe. Can I? Yeah, I'll stop sharing. When children just refuse anything, but the question that we got was about refusing to get out of their car seat. That idea that we want to connect first. So the child's upset, and so we want to connect. We want to say, come here, let me hold you, right? And connect with them and take 2 minutes to just be calm with them and to hear them and to reflect how that child's feeling. That can go a long way. And I often hear parents say, but I can't take the time. Right, but I think it's the opposite. You can't not take the time, right? You taking 2 minutes to calm the child down to get to a different state is going to make the rest of the time go so much more smoothly than when we keep our agenda and what we think needs to be right now. And so really taking that pause that we talked about and, telling them how much that you love them and, just relaxing with them. And then you might start to move into the problem solving. I wonder what would help you. I wonder what would make it easier for you to sit in your car seat. and asking them, are you feeling better now? Are you ready now? And then giving them some control, giving them some choice over that situation. So, do you want to buckle or do you want me to buckle? Or, what song should we listen to after you get in your car seat, right? That giving them some choice around in their environment and around the situation can really help them to feel like we're not resisting them, we're with them, we're partnering with them. And so, that I hope that as you're hearing me answer each one of these questions, that you're really getting the idea that, we need to do that, get curious. We need to make sure that we're watching and really thinking. We need to be intentional about how we're responding to children, and that we're trying to partner with them and come up with solutions together and to help them to become aware of how are they reacting and what are other things that they could do. And then that so important PDA, how do we, when they have those little successes, how do we then comment on it? So every time when that child begins to eat better, when they, you say, oh my gosh, you tried 2 new foods today, that was amazing. You are getting so brave, right? To really acknowledge for that child. Or, you were able to sleep through the night, you didn't call me, and that you must be feeling safe, and that to really like be acknowledging that child's successes. And so naming it, so that they can keep doing it. And so I hope that all of those are really helpful things for you to carry forward as you are working with children and coming up against those challenging behaviors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.